Well, I am very excited to be here with Paul Collins. Paul, thanks so much for taking some time before your show here tonight.
It's my pleasure. It's really my pleasure.
And of course, we're here at SLO Brew here in San Luis Obispo.
Beautiful San Luis Obispo.
Yes, indeed. What do you think about San Luis Obispo? You've been here before, I hear.
Yeah, but not for many, many years. It was so beautiful driving into town, and this is a very special part of California, and it's just beautiful.
Well, Paul, you're actually, SLO Brew is very soon going to be reconfiguring. I guess I'm going to say that in a very diplomatic way. A lot of unknowns about the future of SLO Brew. Going to be moving to a new location.
Oh, really?
A lot of things brewing, excuse the pun. But you are one of the last, I think, big name artists that's going to be playing here. So I think it's kind of historic that as a swan song to the old SLO Brew, certainly, we have a legend such as yourself here tonight playing.
Thank you. I'm just happy I can do what I do. I love doing what I'm doing, and tonight there's a lot of old friends here.
Yes.
And a lot of times I'm reminded when I work of the power of music in general, how it brings people together, old people, young people. It's generational. It crosses all the boundaries, and I'm very proud to be able to be a part of that whole musical community.
Very cool, very cool. Well, Paul, one other thing that you, I think maybe by default, I think intentionally so, I've heard, you were really promoting today. There was a very cool, pretty recent phenomenon here in San Luis Obispo called the SLO Record Swap, a kind of a collective of people really supporting the art form of vinyl records. I want to give a big shout out to Mike at Boo Boo Records, Malik, Manuel, all the DJs, all the aficionados out there. You are a big supporter of DIY culture, of local business, bringing people together. So was tonight's phenomenon kind of similar to all that?
Well, it's, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention.
There we go. Uh-huh.
And a couple of tours ago, one of the problems that a lot of bands and musicians have, especially in the circuit that I work at, the relatively underground DIY, is that getting attendances, getting people to be at the show so that the opening act doesn't play for nobody, or that the shows run on time. And it's in a lot of cases it's very difficult. The opening act, obviously they don't want to play in front of anybody, nobody. So I was trying to think, like, what can we do to jumpstart this thing? And I came up with this idea to have the local store come down to the show, bring and it varies. Sometimes it's a couple of crates of vintage rock and roll records, or sometimes it's more elaborate, like what we had tonight. And combine that with a DJ and a happy hour to encourage people to come early to the show, so that when the show starts, there's people there and there's a vibe going on. And when you're DIY, you try a million different ideas, and some of them work and some of them don't. And for some reason, this idea caught on like wildfire. The stores were so supportive. Awesome. And it turned into, I didn't know this when I first started it, but it became a real community thing, because obviously the record stores are in the community.
Definitely.
And the record stores also are connected to all the record lovers in the community.
Yes, indeed.
And it became a celebration of vinyl, and it incorporated both record collectors, older people, but the real windfall was the young people would come, they would go through the bins, they would buy the records of bands that they had heard about or known about, that are the forerunners to this whole scene. And it was a win-win situation. And every night is different. Some nights there were bigger crowds, some nights there were other crowds, but the record stores really embraced the idea, and they really saw it as a way to connect with the younger audience and let them know who they are and where they are. And I was just very, very happy and proud that it worked out that way. And this is a great example with Boo Boo's. I mean, Boo Boo's is a record. In fact, Mike saw my shows here back in the day. So when I called him, he said, yeah, I know who you are. And I was like, oh, great. So that's kind of like something I've taken as a personal challenge to really promote the whole thing. And the biggest thing and the best thing about what's going on now is there are all these young musicians that cite the music that I play and the generation that I come from and the bands that I grew up with as influences. And I think that's really, really encouraging.
I was talking to a gentleman, I think with the opening band at the merch booth earlier, and he was showing me a covers album that you have here, and some big names of bands, some of whom I've actually interviewed, at least Shannon from Hunks and the Punks. Awesome. One of my favorite bands, Tijuana Panthers, who performed here a couple months ago. Love those guys. Back in the day, let's say, pre-internet, many decades back, it wasn't uncommon for different bands from different sides of the pond, so to speak, different places in the world, to independently come up with similar band names. And then at a later point in their trajectory, perhaps when they got a little bigger, or the A&R lawyers, where they were inking their first record deal, something came up where they said, gosh, there's a band in another country with that same name. The Charlatans, the Suede, London Suede, the list goes on and on. But of course, as it relates to the Beat, that was a situation that happened. And neither the Beat in England nor you guys were necessarily aware of the other's presence until a record execs made an issue of it, right?
Yeah.
And then there was a lawsuit or some issues around that.
I don't know how that rumor got started. There was never
Tell us the real
lawsuit.
Okay.
It was bizarre because when I decided to use that name, I thought, oh boy, this is awfully close to the Beatles, and we could be in for a lot of hot water with the press on this. Like, who do you guys think you are?
Okay.
And that, curiously,
like Paul's comparing himself to Jesus. So yeah, that guy. Yeah.
never came up. But what was really just this huge coincidence is that there was a ska band in London or in England that was using the same name.
I put my foot in my mouth over there I almost said, here they are, the Beat, and I'm not supposed to do that. Why is that in this?
It would have been nice if you had, though.
Well, it was close. That's what you're known at as home. Why can't you use it here?
Well, there's a group that everywhere else in the world called Paul Collins Beat. I think they're from the West Coast, they're from around here. But they've got the name The Beat.
So you've become in the United States the English Beat. A little
Well,
cumbersome,
but top. First one to the top gets the name.
All right. We won't take sides. I don't want to get caught.
Christmas card to the Beat.
I don't want to get caught in that argument.
And what happened was my record had come out as The Beat in the United States. Literally, like, it was September 79, and the English Beat's first album as The Beat came out in England in January of 1980. And so technically, I owned the name everywhere else in the world except for in England because our record had not been released. So it was like a international trade commerce law, doing business as. So since we hadn't released our record in England, they had full title and claim to the name in England. But everywhere else, we owned it. So I remember I got a call in the middle of the night in Los Angeles from an English lawyer, I believe, saying, look, okay, here's the options. We got to settle this situation. You can be the Beat everywhere in the world, but you can't be the Beat in England. And they said, because our album had been pressed and was out in Europe as The Beat, and they kind of, they convinced me that, they said, listen, England is the tastemaker country for all of Europe. So if you don't change your name here, you run the risk of creating all this confusion. If your record is The Beat everywhere else, and it's they said, well, you can call it the American Beat or Paul Collins Beat. And I just reverted to an old show business rule of thumb: use your name. So when I had the choice of being the American Beat or the Paul Collins Beat, I opted for the Paul Collins Beat. In the end, the whole thing was kind of silly because we never had really very much success in England, and they became the English Beat here, and I became the Paul Collins Beat, and that just morphed into the Paul Collins Beat everywhere. And then about I started when I moved back to New York in 2008, and I was touring all over the United States, and I started noticing that, the English Beat would be playing like the night before me, or that they'd be playing in the same town on the beginning of the tour, same town on the end of the tour. And one day in Pittsburgh, we were literally playing across the street from each other.
Wow, okay.
And through a mutual friend, the drummer for the Romantics, Brad Elvis, who's also friends with Dave Wakening, there was this Facebook conversation going on, and I jumped in and I said, what about a tour? And Dave said, yes, I'd love to. And we did this tour a few years back called Two Beats Harding as One. And he is a great gentleman. There was never any animosity between the bands.
Very cool. And we've had the pleasure of interviewing Dave here at Slowbro. He's playing. He's actually going to be playing here at the end of the month. There's signs and they're saying the English Beat and the Paul Collins Beat. So it's a beautiful thing to think that those two trajectories have crossed paths in a mutually beneficial way.
Such a wonderful guy, a great musician. We had so much fun touring with him, and fortunately the music is obviously radically different. So in the end, it was just kind of like a silly little footnote.
Yeah. But it dispelled all those myths out there that somehow there was maybe this antagonism between.
Where this lawsuit thing came up, because a lot of people have mentioned them as a lawsuit. There was never any lawsuit.
Okay. All right,
The one funny thing is there was a review in Australia of an English beat show using our picture. That always cracked me up, because they're talking about Rankin Roger. And there's a picture of four white guys.
no
from
guys
LA.
with nobody toasting with dreadlocks or anything. Yes.
It was funny. In the end, it's the music that counts.
That's-
And both bands, have great music and great followings. And unfortunately, I mean, if we were both rock and roll bands, I think it would have been a little bit more touchy.
Yes, definitely. Well, Paul, I want to ask you about future projects. Of course, you're doing this very successful West Coast America 2015 tour.
The West Coast Summer Tour.
The Summer Tour 2015. Yes, indeed. Any other albums coming out? Anything that fans can expect?
At the end of this tour, I want to go back home to New York, spend the rest of the summer working on new material to put out yet another record. And it's kind of like, just to keep on doing what I'm doing. I tour all over the world, playing clubs. I'm very blessed to have a very loyal and loving fan base that really keep me going. And, some of the people like tonight are people I've known since I was a young guy, and then playing with the kids and for the kids is also a lot of fun. That's where the internet has really been a blessing for me, because through the internet, all these young kids know my music. And it's a mind blower. I'm now well over 25. I have a son myself who's 21. And to have these young people request songs that I know were written 10, 15 years before they were even born, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and so many people, I mean, looking back to the 1974 when the Nerves were formed, correct? Just such an influential, quote, power pop band. So many artists doing cover songs of your music. Yeah. But just all these decades, when you were starting out as a musician in the earlier to mid 70s, did you think that, 4 decades in, that you'd be playing shows, that fans would still be reciting and singing your songs?
I wasn't really thinking about that. Back in the day, it was so difficult to do what we were doing. It was all consuming. All we could think about was how to become big famous rock and roll stars. And we spent all day working on the music and scheming on how we could get out and reach the public. Yeah. And the landscape, like you said, pre-internet, you can't even imagine. There were no cell phones. Yeah. I booked an entire tour out of a payphone.
Wow.
And
that must have cost a lot of dimes or nickels or something. I don't know.
It's a very shrewd plan to do it. I booked a national tour on one dime, but that's a whole nother story. Okay. But the other thing is contacting people. You had to go. You had to write letters and send stuff in the post office. The only thing that hasn't changed, and there's been so many dramatic changes, is that it's still very difficult to sit down and write a great song. That's no cell phone, no computer, nothing is going to help you do that but the old, and just, attention to your craft. And that is the thing that I still respect and admire, and I still, work on myself, is, the art and the craft of writing good songs. And I know now from all my years doing this, the difference between a good song and a bad song, and how much a good song means to me and to everybody, And again, when I can sit and play songs that I wrote when I was 22 or 25 or 30 or whatever, and see that people singing along with them, it's a very powerful thing.
Yes, definitely. And
it's a great thing. And what I do is it's a loving thing. It's warm. It's friendly. It's about having a good time.
Well, it sounds like your intuition over the years, your musical compass, is always pointing in the right direction in terms of constructing songs, intuitively knowing.
The real craft, arranging and writing is. I hope I never reach the end of that quest to, and it's hard. Believe me. Yeah. It is hard, and it doesn't get easier. It's not like I got some formula where I'm going to sit down and knock something out. It's always a labor of love to put together a great song, and it's so satisfying when you think you've done that.
It's a beautiful thing. Paul, one more question, because I know you're going to take the stage here in a little bit. Just a few minutes. Also, you've been known to talk a lot, in addition to the whole DIY aesthetic, also being really efficient, really focused. And I know that during your guys' performance on American Bandstand, bandstand. Saw that one with the legendary Dick Clark. He talked to you a little bit about how quickly you guys had recorded the Paul Collins Beat album.
In the day and age when people go in and spend 7 months making an album, you didn't do that. How long did it take them? Let me get you out here in the spot. The man is drawing back into the darkness here. How long did it take you to make this album?
We did the music in 5 days because we had rehearsed it for about 3 months before we went in.
You've rehearsed it all your life, is the story.
We made that record in 1979, and in that climate, it was the big time record thing, and people would spend months and months in the studio, and the budgets were outrageous. And that, a big part of that was due to the fact that we had the incredible good luck and fortune to work with Bruce Botnick, who was a really sensitive, wonderful, beautiful producer, and he really went out of his way to just capture the band as it was. He acted like a piece of glass, and he didn't put his mark on us. His mission was to get to put us on tape, and he did an absolutely incredible job. And that's why that record sounds as good today as it did when we made it. And that was a huge stroke of good luck. Huge. And I always consider myself lucky to have been a part of that. All the musicians that worked on that record, all the technicians and the producer, everybody involved with that record. I don't know, the stars lined up and everybody had their heart in the right place. And it was very special.
That's beautiful, Paul. And I lied because one more question and then we'll let you go. So speaking of all these wonderful, just beautiful collaborations you've done, I mean, of course, with your bandmates, Pete and Jack and others, looking back on the decades, I mean, what are some collaborations musically, people that you've had the pleasure of taking the stage with or alongside that really stand out in your mind after all these years?
Well, you mentioned Peter and Jack, which were part of my musical education and heritage. Also Stephen Huff, who was really, he and I put together the beat, and then Larry and Michael came along. I was very lucky. Eddie Money, who got me signed, and I did many shows with him, and he taught me a lot about the music business and showmanship. We worked with a lot of very talented people. We worked with the Jam. We worked with Joe Jackson. We worked with Huey Lewis. I met Benny Goodman. I met Dick Dale. Obviously, we got to work with Dick Clark, who was an incredible professional. Gosh, we worked with so many bands back in that time, and it was always a great learning experience. And we were very lucky to work with people that would give us the benefit of what they knew, and we were smart enough to listen. It's a big thing. You really gotta be smart enough to listen to what people have to say to you. Then you can decipher whether it's good or not, but it's important to listen.
Wonderful. Well, there are some wise words there from Paul Collins. For all the budding musicians out there, please listen to the legends, take their advice, take it to heart, because it's priceless, as are you, Paul. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it, bud.
That's
Thank you.
very sweet. Thank you.